Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us on The Last Word tonight. My name is Sophia Wanuna. Now, yesterday we had the ruling from the International Criminal Court. The final two martyrs that were before the ICC on crimes against humanity allegedly committed during the post-election violence in 2007-2008 collapsing. And as plans are at high gear now to prepare a celebration on the 16th of this month, what about the victims is the question that many keep asking. When will justice be served for them? When will they celebrate as well? Lest we forget, tonight that's what we focus on The Last Word. Be part of the conversation. Tweet me at Sophia Wanuna. The hashtag to use this evening is The Last Word, as always, and I'll be looking through your comments as we go along with our conversation tonight. Joining me in studio is Patricia Nyaundi. She is the CEO of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. So, of course, earlier on in the day, we heard from the chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, again talking about the ruling, saying that there were huge cases of interference with witnesses, as we've heard her say in the past, and this time around saying she would pursue those, especially three suspects, to ensure that they are brought to book. But talk to us from where you sit as the CEO of the KNCHR. What you thought of this particular ruling, especially in as far as the victims are concerned?
I was grateful that the cases had finally come to an end. Because for as long as those cases were pending, it looked like there was nothing we could do for the victims. And so I am hopeful that now the cases have finally been terminated. We can again refocus on what it is as a country we ought to be doing for the victims.
So on one hand, terminated, and there are those that are celebrating, but there are victims watching that and saying, so what now happens to what in legal terms is retributive justice, to see people brought to account, held to account, behind bars over those atrocities that were committed? Are you not disappointed that in as far as the processes internationally, that has now fallen apart so far? Locally, we haven't seen much as well.
The challenge we faced as a country was that these were essentially political cases. The conflict was political, and we were seeking a legal solution for a political problem. And the legal, it was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hall. So that really was the challenge, that the solution we sought did not match the problem.
So we should never have moved to court?
We ought to have moved to court, but the problem was that the political elite captured this and transformed it into a political contest. And because our judicial system was unable to evolve in the same way that the case had evolved, there was just no competition. I think the law, because it is black and white, was just no match at all for all these political machinations. And therefore, ultimately, I think that the cases just had to collapse.
And we had, of course, there was a majority ruling, 2 judges finding that there is no case to answer, 1 dissenting, but also the issue of compensation, which is, I want us to focus tonight more on the victims. 2 judges, again, disagreeing, the 2 that found there was no case to answer. And the judge, Robert Fremer, said owing to the absence of a conviction, it was impossible to consider any form of compensation, and I quote him here, no reparations order can be made by this court for the benefit of victims of the post-election violence. So while recognizing for him that there were victims, he said there would not be an order for reparations. However, Judge Chile Osuji said that I am a firm I am of the firm view that the victims of the post-election violence should not be left in the cold because proceedings before this chamber were polluted by undue interference and political meddling, which obscured an accurate assessment. So here are two judges, both at least agreeing they are victims. One, however, saying victims then would have led, a conviction then would have meant, yes, compensation. Now that there's no conviction, unfortunately, that will not happen. But the other judge arguing that there should be compensation. What do you think about that?
I think the problem or the challenge I have had when we have discussed the post-election violence and what should be happening is that we have gone so much to listen to what is being said by other people, international people. I think the time now has come when we must say, but what about us as the Kenyan nation? What do our leaders say? And I think that's what everyone is waiting to hear. What do those in a position of influence say? Will we or will we not provide reparation for the victims? I think what the ICC has done for us as a country is say, it's your problem, deal with it. That's really what they have told us. And those who are in a position to make that decision, I think we are all seated at the edge of our seats and asking ourselves, what will our leadership say to our victims? Will they or will they not get reparation?
Right, and the president did in his last year's State of the Nation address talk about this fund, 10 billion shillings, and he talked about it being rolled out in 3 years, in the next 3 years at least. So we have 1 year gone down the line. Now there's more pressure for that to be put in place. And you have sat in the TJRC, and we will get to that. But this 10 billion, and we're not just talking about post-election violence victims, there's so many other cases. Do you think, first, that this will be set up in due time, and will it go to serve that restorative justice, as is required and needed by those that were affected?
I believe that 10 billion is a drop in the ocean based on the magnitude of what the country is facing in terms of the victims and what they need.
Right.
We are talking, if we put a time frame on it, from the time that we became a state, 1963, and those violations have continued to date. So my sense is that the fund will have to grow.
Right.
The other option we have, of course, is as a country to begin to respect the rule of law and to stop deliberate violations of human rights, which attach a responsibility on the state. So I feel that in terms of state responsibility to its citizens, it is very important that as a matter of priority, the necessary processes be put in place. The president said so in his last year's speech. There were some attempts to set up the fund.
Right.
Turned out that there was no legislative framework upon which the fund could be administered. And you would not believe it, given the number of lawyers we have in this country, that there appeared to be some difficulty about how do you set up the agency that administers the reparation fund. Of course, in this year's State of the Nation address, the president did not continue the conversation, did not appear to give direction on what would happen. But I think his reference to the nationalist covenant
Yes.
is a point we could begin discussing. What does that mean in terms of the state of the nation when we are saying that there's a nationalist covenant that binds us together as Kenyans, and there is a commitment of some nature towards national unity, national cohesion, working together towards our national aspirations. So,
yes.
yeah.
And we'll get to that. I want to take you back to the reparations, because at a time when a victim, watching all these events unfold, so on one hand they feel in terms of retributive justice that, has faced that has collapsed. In terms of restoration, to be able to take them back to where they were. How does it work? And perhaps from your line of work, have you seen that people get to a place where they are now okay, or have even not okay? I don't think you can ever really be 100% okay, because people died, people were affected in various ways, maimed, raped, many atrocities committed. But to get to a place that you make peace with it and feel that there were efforts sufficient put in place to allow for one to get to that place.
I had the privilege of working at the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission. And during that process, we met persons whose rights had been violated, even in the pre-colonial era. And they had been moved from their parcels of land and forcefully relocated to other places. And when they spoke of the harm that they had suffered, 1984, the Wagala massacre, you felt that it had happened the day before. When they expressed their pain, when they talked about their experience, the wounds were still fresh. What struck me is that what added to their pain was the fact that there had been no acknowledgement of the wrongdoing. And repeatedly, what they kept calling for was an acknowledgement that we just need people, those in positions, to publicly state that, yes, this happened. So that is very, very important for those in positions of leadership to say that we acknowledge that this thing happened in Kenya, and that it was wrong, and that these are the victims. Some degree of recognition. So my sense is that for many victims, if they were the Nyayo House torture victims, this has not happened. If it was those who were taken to court for the 1982 failed coup, this has not happened. If it was the Wagala massacre, this has not happened. For the victims of sexual violence during the post-election violence, during the 1992 elections, during 1997, this has not happened. The people who were forcefully evicted from their land in 92, 97, 2007, this has not happened to a large extent. So although there appears to be a national desire to move on and say there's a level of reconciliation, political reconciliation, those who have suffered, especially on account of politically instigated violence, feel that there's an extent to which their plight, their pain has not seared the national conscience.
Yeah, but
that is a challenge.
Yeah, that is a challenge. The president, however, again in his last year's State of the Nation address, gave that apology. It was one of the recommendations in the TJRC report. In fact, that he, the Chief Justice, as well as the Inspector General of Police, gave that apology to the country. So would you say that that apology did anything for these people you've just talked about?
I got a few calls, and they said, that's so important.
Okay.
Yeah, I have someone who calls me. He was affected by the Wagala incident, and he rang me and said, what do you think of the president's apology? And I asked him, what do you think? And he said, I feel I can accept it. I think it's important, and now we would like to hear some more that having apologized, what next? What next? As a commission, we put up a monument working with the community in Wagala. And that appeared to mean so much to the people who had been affected,
Right.
that the names of the people who had been affected were on a wall. For them, it meant that on this plaque, there was a recognition that somebody died at the airstrip.
Yeah.
And that mattered a lot to them. Tragically, when there were demonstrations in Wajir, someone went and demolished that monument. But I mean, the point of it is just to say there is a yearning that as a country, let us publicly acknowledge that some Kenyans have suffered, and say that it is our responsibility as a country to make things right
and keep that memory alive. Like we saw, I was in Garissa over the weekend, you know, and there was a monument as well there
for the
unveiled
university,
for the university, for the 147. So as you're saying, and again, that was a recommendation to establish public monuments, to be able to see them, whether it's in as far as post-election violence is concerned. But we haven't seen movement on this TJRC. Earlier in the year, we saw some of the victims meet members of parliament. You have been in sittings with them. What is the holdup with this report?
Because someone has linked justice for victims to accountability. And sadly, some of the political elite are mentioned adversely in the TJRC report, and they are protecting themselves because they are saying implementing this report means holding me to account. And because I'm in a position to stall the implementation, I will do so to protect myself from being held accountable. So I think this is the primary holdback to the implementation of the TJRC report. And I keep thinking that we could find emerge in Kenya a brave leader who would say, the people of this country, I will treat them with equal value. The one who supports my political ambition is important to me. The one who depends on my political leadership is important to me. The one who is completely vulnerable and is wholly dependent on my goodwill is important to me. I think the day we get that kind of leadership in this country, that kind of leadership is the kind that will rise to the occasion and say, I cannot take it that any Kenyan goes to bed and cries themselves to sleep. Sophie, I have been in forums with women who were raped during the 2007 violence, conceived. Those children are now 8 years old. Those women say they have not received medical attention for the harm that they suffered during the rape. So these are poor women. They cannot afford the surgery that is required to repair them. So they are living with this child that they got through this violent act, a constant reminder of what they have gone through. On their body, they carry injuries that they do not have the resources to repair. They are hurting, but they do not have the resources to repair. Emotionally, they were traumatized. And they moved from one forum to another, speaking their story in the hope that one day someone will hear their story and say, I can take care of this. So I get disturbed. I get very disturbed when people say that the only way that we can give justice to these victims is when there is a conviction. And every time you try and discuss the situation of these victims, you are informed that the DPP has said there is no evidence. But do you need evidence when you're dealing with somebody whose property was destroyed? And we all know that this person had a home, this person had a farm. We have land laws that are meant to protect your property rights.
Right.
Why would you be looking for a conviction to deal with this problem? Yes, why would you be looking for a conviction to deal with the Wagala massacre?
So they should be mutually exclusive.
These things are exclusive, and as a country, we should be saying, is it in order? Even if we begin with the one that appears to have been experienced by the current generation. Because 207 is something majority of us who are now dealing with this experienced. But there were people who spent time in the Nyayo house for the reason that they had different, their political opinion differed from the leadership at that time.
Right.
Some of them were students. Their education was disrupted. They now have criminal records that, for which reason, you know, every time you go for appointment in this country, you need a certificate of good conduct. These people for whom we owe the democracy that we are enjoying now are stuck with criminal records for trials that happened in the night. And we are saying we need a conviction for that before we address what can be handled administratively.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a sense in which I think as a country,
Right.
there's a particular type of leadership we are yearning for. And for some reason, as a country, we are unable to deliver for ourselves that kind of a leadership.
And let's talk about that leadership, because the president, in his statement yesterday, he's out of the country, you know, congratulating the DP on having his the no case to answer motion passed by the judges, said that, you know, reminded Kenyans that even as they campaigned for office, that they campaigned on a platform of reconciliation, that they brought these two communities that had in 2007 been on opposite sides, and now by them coming together in a coalition, they were in essence bringing about reconciliation. But there are those who would argue that would be a simplistic way to look at it, because Kenya has more than those two communities, and we've seen more than those two communities affected as well. So is that true reconciliation that the Jubilee coalition is preaching and is you know, exhibiting, or does there need to be more as far as leadership and what they preach and practice?
What bothers me about the way the main, what we call the big guns in Kenya politically, and you could label them CORD, Jubilee, Amani, is that the discussion, the way they have caged us is to tell us it is either us or them. And we appear to have been drawn into that as a country.
Yeah.
And the conversation, regardless of your level of education in Kenya, is you say, by supporting Jubilee, I oppose CORD. By supporting CORD, I would die for Jubilee.
Yeah.
Which is regrettable. I think we need the kind of leadership that says Kenya first. That a kind of leadership that is driven by the national good and not by the political good. So my own, when I reflect as a Kenyan, and I think what ails this country, I say that I feel, although I feel very Kenyan, I feel that when I step out of my house, I don't get other Kenyans rallying with me because what happens is that we are all so divided.
Yeah. So that reconciliation the president is talking about is not one you think is being felt by Kenyans.
It's not being felt because I consider myself to be, on average, quite educated. But it disturbs me that even when I sit with people at my level, there is a way in which we discuss politics as though it is a life and death affair.
So all read from the same script. All
Yes.
reason and knowing what repercussions of this kind of politics
Yes.
would mean is thrown out of the window.
Precisely, because like now, we sit as a group of educated Kenyans, and we are preoccupied with there's going to be a lot of violence in 2017.
Yeah.
And you ask yourself, would you discuss anything as gloomy as this ordinarily? How is it that as Kenyans, we are comfortable talking gloom
Yes.
about our own country, and we are trapped in this gloom, admittedly, because we have limited our options to the current big guns in politics. And now we are saying that if so-and-so loses, then there's going to be violence. When I think about it, I say, what is the difficulty in allowing the 2 or 3 big guns to apply violence to each other when they lose the election? And the rest of us watch them. What is it about us that compels us that if my candidate loses, I must come at you to fight you?
Yeah. And because, and it's an important point you make, because I want us to talk about the next election. It is a conversation we're hearing a lot, even with, as you said, the most educated, with the experts or analysts, as they like many call themselves, opining even on articles about what is likely to happen. But before I move away from the president's statement, and there will be these celebrations, when he his case was terminated, he said he wouldn't celebrate until all the other cases were terminated. Now that they have 16th of this month, they will be in Nakuru for that big celebration. So I put myself and imagine a victim, put myself in the shoes of a victim who's watching all of this unfold. So there are those who argue, granted, on one hand, if you are facing crimes against humanity, no matter who you are, you would celebrate if, those charges are dropped. But this is not just any other person. This is the president and the deputy president who are the unifying chief, if you like, so that when you look at them, it's not just about, yes, their cases were terminated, but they're still the same people who are supposed to be ensuring these victims who are Kenyans get justice and feel they're part of. So do you feel there's a disconnect there? And as far as, how the president is running this matter?
What I would hope is that some decisions have been made because not all information was made available.
Right.
But increasingly, as some voices are heard, I think it's our Muslim brothers, when they are celebrating their high feasts, the way they do so is by feeding the hungry.
Right.
I think there is a sense in which the measure of your gratitude should be how much you are willing to relieve the suffering of someone else.
Well said.
And I wish, because we are dealing with people I have heard are Christians, I think this is in the Christian spirit to say that I feel I have enjoyed God's favor so much. The only way I can fully express my gratitude to God is by allowing him to use me as an instrument to bless the less fortunate, including those who, unlike me, having borne the burden of the 2007 crisis, because actually that is what has happened to our 2 leaders.
Right.
They have borne the burden of the 2007 crisis by being held responsible for it. That burden has now been removed. There is also another category that has borne the burden of that crisis by being suffering during that period. So being naive, I am not a politician.
Yeah.
I don't know, but speaking from my heart.
I hope it will not be a political rally.
Yeah,
with,
I think that there should be some degree to which, if we say it is a prayer to listen now and say, there are other people who are saying, we are so glad for you that your experience with 2007 has ended well. Make ours also end well.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I would not limit it to 2007. I would say go back to 1963, when we became a country. What went wrong? Because in 2010, when we promulgated the Constitution, we redefined ourselves as a country and said this country is going, Article 10, is going to be founded on the following principles. And what should have been happening from 2010 is, for us to live a new life. That puts aside some of these things. When we emerged from colonial rule, we came forth as 42 tribes. Some had been the favorites of the colonial master.
Yeah.
Some had been judged by the colonial master as not being very useful to this protectorate. And we carried that with us even when we birthed ourselves as a country in '63. And that had given us problems as a country. And in 2010, we said, we know that this is the problem. So moving forward, we are going to be a country based on national values, principles. Some of these values are equality, respect for human rights, non-discrimination, equity. So what a wonderful moment now when both our leaders are relieved of this burden to say, okay, this thing, and everybody understood, was a burden. What I think when I had the decision, I said, at last, we can stop talking so divisively. And our two young leaders can get down to the business of governing Kenya.
Yeah, and that the president would actually, as we go on break, the president can put life into the words he spoke during the State of the Nation address. That's nationalist covenant, which was the common thread that connected every facet of our society and sectors in terms of the economy, and bringing them together and talking so eloquently. Well done speech, but the question is, can it then have life, to bring to the point what you're saying, that from our forefathers in 1963 independence up to this particular point and the atrocities that have been committed, that as a people we can feel we are exactly that one, and that there are consequences for those that intend to harm others, but also that people feel this is a president and a government for all. So definitely an important conversation, which we will continue with and talk more, especially about also other examples, what we can learn from other countries that have gone through dark periods like Kenya went through in 07, 08, and how they've come out from that.